an absurd amount to spend on a garden. I will be the first one to admit. But you know what? I would do it all over again. I love my garden space and I have no problem spending that much on my garden because it is where I produce the majority of the food that we eat now as far as vegetables go. Hi, I'm Veronica with Mini Urban Farm, a channel about urban gardening and urban homesteading in the suburbs. Today I'm going to tell you exactly how much I spent on my garden, the exact amount, an entire breakdown, how much everything costs, and even some things that I could have saved some money on. Plus I'll tell you some things that I actually just spent some money on and how much those things cost exactly also. So if that sounds good, hit the like button and we'll just jump right into it. Okay, so the amount that I'm going to share with you is actually for the garden setup. So everything that you see behind me, the rocks, the planter beds, everything. I have an entire list with the breakdown amounts. Everything that I spent to set up the garden. That does not include the seeds, the plants that went into the garden. This is only the setup. So that includes the raised beds, both the raised beds with trellises and without trellises. I have 9 raised beds total. The landscape fabric, the rocks, and the pavers that kind of like line, I don't think you can see it, but there's like pavers that separate the rocks from the edge of the garden. The soil in my raised beds, everything that went into the raised beds themselves. There's 2 really big pots here also at the front of the garden. So guys, I spent a lot of money on this garden. When I was calculating the actual amount that I spent, I was really surprised. But first let me tell you why I spent that much. So I used to live in South Florida, and when I met Alan, he lived up here in Central Florida, in the Tampa area, which is where I am now. And I decided that I was going to move up here, but there were some concessions to make because I'm used to having my own space, and it's a lot to move into a different city. So one of the things that he said that he would do if I moved up here instead of him having to move down there was to give me my garden space. Now this is probably about twice the size of my garden that I used to have, so it's definitely an upgrade for me, and I got it exactly the way I want. I wanted all the rocks and the pavers, and I wanted it really pretty, so I didn't mind spending this much, and I know that it is a lot. I spent exactly $748.92. $750 I spent on this garden. That is an absurd amount to spend on a garden. I will be the first one to admit. But you know what? I would do it all over again. I love my garden space and I have no problem spending that much on my garden because it is where I produce the majority of the food that we eat now as far as vegetables go. Alright, so let's break down how we got to $750. So this garden is about 400 square feet. That's the entire thing, the rocks, everything. I have pots and some fruit trees kind of like scattered here in front of me that you can't see. So it's everything that's in this area, which is where all of my plants go. It's not including like the potting bench on the patio or some of the potted plants. It's just included like this area here. So my large raised bed, right, which is 8 feet by 3 feet, that is the biggest bed I have. It does not have a trellis on it. It is all the way that one back there. That one cost me $23.04 to build. All right, only the raised bed itself. So that was 12 fence pickets, and it does have 2x4s, but I used kind of the 2x4s that were extra from some of the other ones, so I kind of calculated that in the price of the other ones. So that's only one. Now I have 4 raised beds that do not have a trellis. Those were $15.36 each. So times 4 is $61.44. Not too bad. And each one of those has 8 pine treated pine wood fence pickets, right? That's what I used to actually make this part here. And then again, I didn't count for the 2x4s on the corners here because I took extra pieces from the ones with the trellises. So I also have 4 raised beds that have a trellis, right? Which is this right here. You can see all my little tomatoes still climbing on there. And that is $41.36 each. All right, for a grand total of 4 raised beds at $165.44. Now that's for the 8 pine fence boards for around the beds, and then 6 2x4s for the trellises. Now I used 2x4s. I could have used 2x2s or something else, but that's what I decided to go with. If I had to do it again, I would probably go with 2x2s or even 2x3s, but then they wouldn't be as sturdy. So, you know, it's just an added expense, but I don't mind having spent it because these trellises are actually really sturdy. And that also accounts for the netting that goes around the actual trellisy part that goes up over the entire trellis. So the soil in my raised beds, right? And I made the soil from scratch. I didn't buy bagged soil, right? You can buy raised bed soil, you can buy potting soil. I chose to actually make my own soil, which I have an entire another video on how to make seed starting soil. It's kind of similar to the raised bed soil. I added a few more things in my raised bed soils, but the entire amount that I spent for the raised bed soil was $168. That's a lot of money for what's essentially dirt, right? But I wanted to put in the highest quality. I wanted to make sure that the beds were filled properly, because now, every year, every season, you have to go and add more soil in. So I wanted to have a good base to start with. And last season was ridiculously productive in this garden, so I actually don't mind having spent that much for soil. Okay, so as far as landscaping goes, that is the rocks, the pavers, and the landscaping fabric. So what we did, you can see all the grass over there. We took and we put landscaping fabric underneath, and then we just basically, I think it's called solarization, where you just let everything like under it kind of die. So we killed off all the grass in this area. We bordered it with the pavers. I think there's like 50 pavers total, and then we put down the landscaping rocks. So total for all the landscaping around the raised beds was $166. I also have 2 large pots that my rosemary plants go in, and I wanted those just because I think they look really pretty. I didn't want to put the rosemary directly in the ground because it does get quite large, and I just like the way that they look having those 2 pots at the beginning of the garden. I think it's a nice little entrance to the raised beds. So each one of those was $30 for a grand total of $60. I have also my compost bin, which was $80. And of course, miscellaneous like screws and staples and things of that nature came out to about $25. So a grand total of $748.92. So let me just say, you don't actually have to spend that amount in order to have a garden, right? You can have a garden with a few grow bags, some pots. You can grow in Home Depot buckets with some drainage holes on the bottom. And I've definitely done that before. So I wanted to have this garden space because it's something that I'm really invested in. It's something that I've been doing for a long time now. And I wanted to have an actual very pretty garden space. You don't have to have this type of garden space or spend that much money on a garden in order to garden, right? You can garden in pots, you can garden in containers. You can definitely reduce the amount that you're spending on all of these items, right? But I chose to have this type of garden with this landscaping, the heavy trellises, because I have been doing this for so long. I've been gardening for over about 10 years now, and I really, really enjoy it. It is an investment, and I spend a lot of time out here. So if you're just getting started, please do not go out and spend $750 on a garden if it is your first time gardening. So let's talk about some of the ways that I could have saved money on this garden if I chose to do a few things differently. So the rocks themselves were not that expensive. We got these massive deliveries of rocks. I think they were $32 each, so somewhere in the 90s for the rocks, which is not ultimately that bad. Things that I could have saved money on were the trellises, right? I could have made them 2x2s instead of 2x4s. That would have definitely cut down on the cost, but it also would have cut down on the sturdiness of the trellises. So that's something to consider if you're wanting to do trellises. Now, another thing that I could have cut down the cost on was the pots, right? I have these 2 pots that are really pretty. You don't have to spend $30 on a pot. You don't even have to put pots there. So if that's something that, you want to reduce, then don't add pots at the beginning of the garden beds. I just like how it looks at the entrance of the garden. We could have actually used recycled materials or scrap lumber. That would have saved a lot of money in the garden. And if you guys have been watching my other videos, you have seen that I have used a lot of scrap lumber for my potting bench, for the chicken coop. I have used definitely a lot of scrap materials. So we just didn't have any at that time, and we had just decided we were going to do garden, and there just was no scrap wood around. So we ended up having to buy everything. So if you do have scrap lumber, definitely use that because it will cut down the cost considerably. And then one of my highest ticketed items on here at $168 was the actual soil that went into the beds. Now, I could have gone to some place and get like a bulk delivery of compost, right? So there's actually a place around here that for about, I think it's like $30, you can fill the entire bed of a truck with all the compost that you can fit in there. But I decided, since I don't know the quality of that compost, and I did call, they weren't really able to give me any details about the compost, I decided to go with bagged compost from Home Depot instead of using that compost. So if I would have done that, that would have saved a lot of money, but I just wanted to have the best quality materials inside the raised beds. So those are a few ways that you can actually reduce the cost. You can actually also get rid of the entire landscaping and just have the raised beds. It is just as effective. There's nothing saying you have to have the landscaping around your raised beds. You can just choose to have grass in between your raised beds. So that's another way to get rid of the expense. Now, that being said, I don't regret having spent $750 on the garden. I actually love this garden and I'm going to continue to invest in it. So 2 more things that this season I will be adding to the garden. One is more trellis space. So for these trellises back here, you can see I have 1 trellis and then another one back there, and the same thing on this side. There's 1 trellis and then 1 bed without a trellis, and then a trellis and then 1 bed without a trellis. So I will be adding in 2 more trellis spaces, which means I need extra 2x4s because I do want it to match. I don't want to do 2x2s on one and 2x4s on the other one. So I want sturdy trellises. I'm gonna go ahead and do the 2x4s. I will likely be using scrap material. Where I live currently, they're doing a lot of construction, so there has been a lot of scrap material. I'll probably be using scrap material to do that, and then all I have to buy is the actual netting, and I have screws and things like that already. So that will be not that much of an investment, but it'll probably be a good like $40-50 when it's all said and done to add the additional trellises. Let's see. Another thing, and this is actually one of my homesteading goals for 2021 that I am very excited about, is my irrigation, my drip irrigation system that I am finally putting in. Now, I have been hand watering, manually watering the garden for as long as I can remember. I have never had a drip irrigation system, but we are actually going on vacation quite soon, and I wanted to have some sort of assurance that the water is getting into the garden without having to just depend on another person. I feel bad, asking somebody to come in every single day and water the garden, and it is getting very hot here in Central Florida already. So I want to make sure that the garden is 100% taken care of, and then just have somebody come in and double check that everything is going well. So I just actually bought an entire irrigation setup, and when I do that, I will definitely film it. But I just spent $135 on an irrigation system. So that includes the drip irrigation tubing, the main tubing line, the timer, right, which is actually pretty expensive, and all the other materials that you need to combine all of the tubing and the elbows and all of that. So that is actually probably one of the biggest ticket items that I will be spending on a garden this year. So let me just say, all of those materials right now does not include the actual cost of seeds. It doesn't include the cost of watering the garden on a daily basis. Those are extra separate things. And I usually spend about $50 per season in ordering seeds. Now, that fluctuates because as time goes on, I've definitely started seed saving more and propagating my own plants out. So that definitely reduces the cost, and it really helps to lower the seasonal expenses of gardening. I also sell some of the plants and some of the herbs that I propagate, so that helps too. Usually what I do is I'll buy all my seeds, and then the money that I get from selling those seed starts just kind of funds the next season's worth of seeds. So that is generally how I fund the garden without having to take it out of my own pocket all the time. Now, the majority of this stuff is a one-time cost. There are very few things that are multiple recurring expenses. Some of my recurring expenses are the cost of water, right, which I pay on a monthly basis through the water bill. That is part of the cost of the garden as well. The cost of fertilizers, the cost of compost, right, which I make my own compost, but I do supplement with compost from the store sometimes when I run out of my own homemade compost. The cost of seeds, as I already talked about, and the cost of additional accessories like tomato ties or red solo cups for seed starting when they run out, or things like that, right? There's always going to be expenses at the beginning of every season that you have to account for when you're gardening. But as far as the garden setup, that is it. I mean, we are not touching this garden for a while besides the drip irrigation system that is going in this season. That is pretty much the entire garden set up. So if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up for more urban gardening and homesteading content. Thanks.